We are on Romans Part 2, Lesson 1, Part A. Part B, I'm sorry. A was last week. B is the second part. We decided to change the lesson into 2 lessons instead of 1 to give us time for the overview, not to be in a rush, and to give us time to be able to look and see what this book is about and get our minds back in it. So I left our board from last week so we don't have to rewrite all of that. We'll just go through it really fast, and then we're going to add today some of our themes or of the whole book, the segment divisions as we call them, mainly wrapping up anything else as far as who wrote it, why it was written, some of the key words and things like that. So if you want to get out your at-a-glance chart, that's basically what this is supposed to look like. It's a little harder to put it all up there. And we were just saying before I started the video how hard it is to see this, so hopefully you can expand it. But what is the main theme of the entire book of Romans? The righteous shall live by faith. And where do we get that information? 1:16 and 17, right? That's the address for this idea that the righteous man, it says, but that means humans, not just man as in gender. The righteous shall live by faith. And then we saw that each one of our chapter themes should support our main theme. Some of them, it seems like, are like a little bit of a stretch, but if the chapter theme is really thematic of that chapter and the main thing that's talked about there, it should be upheld in the overall theme. But within that, we even began last week starting to see how suddenly we start talking about a common theme maybe under 2 or 3 chapters. Now, so the first part of Romans that we did in the prior semester dealt with the first segment division, were actually kind of the first 2 segment divisions, because it dealt with chapters 1 through 5. After you get past the greeting of chapter 1, and in the greeting we know who wrote the book, right? Who wrote the book? Paul. He identifies himself, right? We know that Romans is what type of literature? A letter, or sometimes we call them epistle. So it is a letter. It is from someone and to someone, plural on either end, if possible. And in this case, it's from Paul. He identifies himself. And then it's to Romans. That's why we call it the book of Romans. But what particular group within Rome is he writing to? Christians. And the Christian group in Rome is made up of what? 2 types? Jews and Gentiles, right? That's what the church is about. We sometimes lose focus on that and think of Jews still being... There are Jews that practice Judaism, but these are Jews by birth and Jews prior to conversion to Christianity. And then you've got the Greeks or the Gentiles, which is the 2 groups of people that God identifies in the Bible over and over again. You got the Jews and everybody else, which are the Gentiles, right? Okay, so that's who the book is written to. The time frame is a few things that we know about the history from Paul that are in the first chapter and also towards the end, like about the second half of chapter 15 through chapter 16. We get some of the other history statements. We know that Paul, what is his relationship with the Christians in Rome? Never been there, right? We know of Paul that his normal is that he would go to the Gentiles, even though whenever he went to a city, he always sought out the Jews first and presented to them first. So whether it was a synagogue or whether, like in the case of Lydia, where she was by the river, that would have indicated there weren't enough people in that city to have made up a synagogue. And so some would maybe meet for prayer. And so Paul found them, and Lydia was the one that was the purple dye seller, you know, and purple cloth seller, I guess. And she got saved, and the others that were with her got saved. So Paul, that was Paul's normal. He would go somewhere, seek out the Jews first, and then he would also turn. His main ministry, though, was to the Gentiles. He was going to Gentile cities, so he was outside of what nation? Outside of Jews, yeah, outside of Israel, right? Not that he wasn't from, but actually he was born a Roman citizen. That was another thing. He could move about the Roman Empire that much better because he was born a Roman citizen as well as a Jew. So as he went to these places and as he spoke to them, what was he laying out for them? The foundation of Christianity, the gospel, right? A clear presentation of the gospel, He even says in other books like Galatians, he says, if anyone comes after me and presents a gospel to you contrary to my gospel, which there is no gospel, other gospel, is what he's saying. So he would say gospel, and he goes, but there's really no other gospel. Then those people should be an anathema. You know, considered the worst of the worst that they've come behind. Do we have that happening today? Yeah, right. That's what's happening a lot. What we see is in these even very successful churches, you know, big growth movements and all that, a lot of times what we have is not the true gospel being presented. And as I was saying earlier and prior, those people are going to be held very responsible at their judgment. So we pray that truth would be revealed to them and they would stop that. But a lot of times it's a gospel that is maybe more attractive, it seems. And even though it's so odd to think, a presentation of anything that would be better than hearing the truth of the gospel. But they make it better in their thinking. More, what does Paul tell us to Timothy? He says, tickling of the ears. You know, telling them what they want to hear. Prosperity gospel is one. The tragedy of a prosperity gospel is, though, that Christ has told us that our Christian walk is going to be full of what?
Not good.
Not good. Yeah, a lot of not good.
things.
For a lot of yeah, people that will come against us, personal tragedies. It's not a time of you get saved and everything is wonderful and gravy. Right. He says they hated me first. Jesus said that. Therefore, they're going to hate you. Right? So if you really truly are aligned with Christ and living your life, guess what? There's going to be people that love you. Don't get me wrong. You're not going to be hated by everybody, but you are going to be hated by the world. And we fight that. We don't like that. We want our lives comfortable. Okay. But the prosperity gospel's tragedy is that people believe that life in a Christian life is full of wealth and ease and comfort. And so when that doesn't happen, and to that person, let's say they do believe and life doesn't get better, then if they're in one of those prosperity gospel situations, they're told you didn't have enough faith, or you didn't pray hard enough, or whatever. In other words, it's your fault, you did something wrong, because if you're following their script, and look at them, they have tons of money. They're doing
They've
great.
gotten it all from you.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And they smile a lot, but sorry, there's one person I'm specifically thinking about, and you know who that is. But again, we need to pray for them, pray for the people under their influence, but also pray for them because they will face a judgment someday that it's going to be exceedingly bad. So in our study and as we're looking, those first 5 chapters dealt with, in our alliteration of S's, dealt with first what? Sin. And the second dealt with salvation. Okay? The bad news and the good news, right? The gospel is good news. But the good news is so gooder because the bad is so bad, right? You know? And that's, but when you see this pattern, you have a pattern for yourself in talking to somebody and presenting the gospel. When you're presenting the gospel to somebody, you can tell them up front, I'm saved and I'm going to present the gospel to you, or whatever you want to say. But the first thing you have to do is help that person see what? Sin. Personal sin in their life. And bring them to the point, and again, when I say it this way, I don't mean you do, but as you're presenting it to them, don't bypass sin. Don't make them feel good so that you good them into heaven. It doesn't they have to come to the realization of their need. You know, why would they need Jesus? Why would they need salvation if there's nothing wrong with them? And that's where most people are. And they could be what we call good people. You know, they could be church people like I was, and I really was better than a lot of people in the sense I didn't cause problems, and I'm not saying better in
like the right thing.
I did most of the time, you know.
Yeah.
At least I didn't get caught. But I had wrong motivations, and I wasn't really. But in comparison, yeah, I was one that didn't get in trouble, and I made good grades. Yeah. so it was, in a way, I was very deceived, so it was harder for the truth to get in me and make me understand. But it really isn't that hard, because I knew my own thoughts, and they weren't always good. And I had done some things that I don't want to tell anybody about, that weren't so good. So it wasn't that hard for God to reveal it. But I was over here going, I'm not as bad as. That's what a lot of times you think. So bringing someone to an understanding of sin. And so whose standard is sin? Is it ours? No, it's God's. Right. So when you're presenting that to someone, and we've got a lot of hot topic items in our nation right now that a lot of people don't want to see as sin and will argue us down, but we don't need to be casual, but we need to just say it's not my standard. It's God's standard laid out and laid down, and that hasn't changed. Okay, so you've got the sin, and then you've got salvation. You tell them about salvation, right? The next segment we're going to be looking at is sanctification. Right, and that's those chapters 6 through 8. So as we look at that, what is the idea? Like, what is the root of sanctification? Do you remember the root word? What would we be called?
Righteous.
Righteous. Okay, so righteous is at its base, absolutely. Where's righteousness come from? It comes from God. It's not my righteousness, right? What is my righteousness? Because I can have righteousness, my own human version, right? But what does God view that as? Filthy rags, right? Nastiness, awful, horrible nastiness. Okay, so my righteousness, that filthy nastiness, gets me what?
Nothing.
Well, it actually does get me something, but it doesn't get me what I want.
Anything good.
It doesn't get me anything good. It doesn't get me entrance into heaven, right? It does get me,
Another place.
yes, yes. I am born on the path to hell. Everybody's born on the path to hell. I just want to let that sink for just a second. So the image I love to think about, not love to think about, but it was just helpful to me, is just think of a very broad road, and everybody's on it. Everyone born is on it, headed in one direction. And as a friend of mine said, I think it was John MacArthur said, and every road sign on the way, you were talking about landmarks and road signs, hurricanes destroyed and passed, so that you could find your way. Every road sign says you're on the way to heaven. But you're not. You're on the way what? Where? To hell. Deserving of it. And then you act out of your unrighteousness. You're going to. Every human does. And Romans tells us all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We fall short of the standard of God. Everyone, all people, doesn't matter where you're born, doesn't matter what your skin color is, doesn't matter what gender you are, it doesn't matter your age, all inclusive, everyone, okay? You're on your way to hell. But then, in some cases, something happens, and you turn from that path and you go in the other direction. That truly is the way to heaven, right? But you're still among those people. That's, instead of it being a two-way street where you've got those people going the wrong way and you're going here, or the idea some people think that they get to stand at the median and decide. No, you're headed on one path and you turn around, by God, you turn around and you head towards Him. You head in the opposite direction. Okay, I was going just that way. That's called repentance. Okay? And it's not a partial repentance. It's not sort of halfway there because I can still see here and I can still see there. It's all the way around. So in my picture, when I started thinking about it this way, you're walking, basically bumping up against those people that are headed in the direction you used to be headed. That's your walk in this world.
Salmon going upstream.
Salmon going upstream, fighting against the current. Or if you've ever been in one of those situations where the crowd is trying to get out the door and you're trying to get this way. Yes, we have been. Yes, and literally you're just, and that's a great picture. Sandy and I were talking about when we were at convention in Utah in June. There would be these huge, huge auditorium rooms at the convention center, right? And there's one down there with, I don't know, 8 doors to it. And then there's the next one, that's A and B. There's another one. And then you've got an escalator coming down here. So you've got people coming down. You've got people walking over that way. You've got people trying to get into this. But you've got all those people trying to come out.
30,000 people.
Moving around. Yeah, not coming out of that one room.
Right,
But
moving
thousands coming out of that one room and thousands more going back in for the next session, right? There might be a 5-minute transition. So literally, until we had people help and direct, we were standing there, and we're trying to stand here so that people coming down the escalator can walk past us or go that way, and it was just a log jam. And at one point, seriously, people were coming down the escalator and their eyes were getting this big because there was nowhere for them to go. So they were walking backwards on the escalator as it kept going because there was nowhere for them to go. But the people coming out we were literally like this, staring at each other. And we're going, we need to get over there. And they're like, we need to get over there. And we couldn't. But then afterwards, they got a clue. It's people moving issues. But yeah, it's think about it. We were face to face like that close, face to face. When you turn in repentance and you walk the opposite direction towards God, you're going to be facing those people. And they're going to see your face. It's good and bad. They're going to see your beautiful face. Yes, Sandy did this. They're going to see the glory of God on your face. That's the reflecting of His glory. That's not anything that comes out of me. Well, I guess it could come out of me in the sense that the Holy Spirit's in me, He's shining forth. Right. But it really is more the idea of a mirror reflecting back the sun and just blinding people, okay? But they're going to see your face, okay? Some of them are going to be attracted to that. Yes, and you hope they turn. You have the opportunity to talk to them and you hope they turn and go with you. That would be the hope and the goal. Absolutely. But others are not going to like it. Right. They're going to hate your face. They're going to hate that you think there's another way. They're going to scream and argue with you, no, I'm on the way to heaven.
They hate the light.
They hate the light. Yes. And they hate the light partly because it shines out and points out the darkness, doesn't it? Yes. And yes, they're going to hate it. So there's going to be both reactions. And you're going to have some that you can talk to face and impact for the glory of God and for the kingdom. And they would turn also. If God has called them out, they will be drawn to you. And God will have done the work in advance and work through you, and you'd have that ministry. Okay, I always want to make sure it's not me doing something, but it's me participating. God given us that opportunity. But the other is you're going to be jostled and you're going to have a hard time getting through. It's not going to be easy. So that narrow path that we talk about versus the wide road to distraction, that's the one headed to I guess I keep going opposite. I said hell was that way, heaven's this way. The narrow path is literally, I think, among the wide one, in the sense that you are walking your one walk. Look at all the Proverbs that say, He is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. So that narrow road is as narrow as you are, in that sense. Yeah. Now it could be in the sense of there's more people. There's a lot of little streams going up there, or the salmon swimming upstream. It really helped me see, instead of thinking of it as a small narrow path over here and a wide road over there, that I'm off that road. Well, if I'm off that road, they're not paying attention to me. I have no impact. They're headed in droves to hell, while I'm headed in the opposite direction. And I've gotten off of that path. That could be it too. They might glance over, you might be able to shout or whatever. But I think to me, it's more relevant to think of it as when I turn from where I'm standing, I turn and I head to the opposite direction, and then we see each other face to face. And that's where our impact can be, is they get to see that, and we get to have some impact on them. So that's the sin, salvation, and sanctification. We talked about righteousness. The root of sanctification is the word holy, or hagios, right? We are hagios, meaning we are saints, right? We don't like to say that, but God says it of us, okay? Not saints in the sense of the way we misuse the word, saying, oh, isn't she such a saint? Or as a particular religious organization deems and puts the name on somebody who has died. We're talking about saints in the sense of being set apart. That's the idea of sanctification, is being set apart. Being set apart from common use, like a bowl that was used commonly in your kitchen, to now it's holy and it's only for God's service. And it was never to be put back into common use again. Okay? That's the idea of holy. And so that's the idea around sanctification. To be sanctified is to be made holy by God and then live that holy from that point forward. Set apart. But again, as I said in my picture of the two roads, set apart. I'm turned. I'm changing my direction has changed, right? That sets me apart from the rest of the people, doesn't it? But we're not set apart in the sense that we're away from them. We're walking in this world. But among this world, we're not going to walk just like the world. These are things that you've heard before, but we're putting it back. So in sanctification, that's the time of now. Okay? This is past sin, right? Sin is in our past. Salvation would be that present salvation, and it's part of your ongoing life. But sanctification is that very present time in your life. Salvation is a point in time. So sanctification is the rest of your time here on this earth. What is the ultimate goal of our sanctification? We are to be what? Like Jesus. So,
Justified.
yes, slaves to righteousness, slaves of God. Bond servants is another term that we use, meaning that voluntarily, you remember the all in the ear, voluntarily we stay under that master because we were treated so well. And it's for life, you never get out of it. You were going to say something?
We always hear about justification and sanctification.
Yes. Yes. And there a lot of these terms like justification and righteousness, justified and righteous are very similar terms, but sometimes there's just a nuanced difference, okay? When we're justified, that means that we stand before God just, meaning righteous or just. He has made us that.
So it's kind of like the sanctification is our path to justification, right?
There's ultimate justification. There's justification at salvation. You know, I am made right with God at that point. But then we also have that ultimate, at some point, let's say judgment even, where we stand before Him. Yes, we stand before Him completely right with God, and that's. But sometimes I like to think of these words and examine these words and how we use them incorrectly. Like we will say, I'm justified, and sometimes it's close. Like you might justify your actions. Remember you thinking something like that? Like, well, I did that because, you know, if you wouldn't have blah, 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 right? And we feel justified in what we're doing. And somebody told Johnny years ago, and it really stuck in my brain, if you ever use that word, you probably need to stop, take a few steps back, and re-examine. What were you saying, Sandy?
No excuses. I think
Yes, that's chapter 2. Yeah, it starts there. There are no excuses. Certainly in our relationship with God, but even in our behavior towards people. You know, be careful if you're starting to justify how you've done something. Doesn't mean you're wrong. That's not 100%. But chances are, it's more of your human nature coming up and you giving yourself an excuse for what you just did. That's another way of looking at it. So be careful of that and just step back. Okay. The sanctification is the idea of being set apart, no longer in common use, now set apart to God, for slave to God, slave to righteousness, dead to sin, all of those things. And then we're going to more and more and more and more become conformed, not to this world, but transformed by the renewing of our mind and become more like Jesus, right? Jesus was perfect, right? Jesus had all of the spiritual gifts. He didn't just have them, He exhibited them, okay? I'm gifted at my spiritual birth with certain spiritual gifts. One of them is teaching. It's part of why I do what I do. But I should still, Paul says, do the work of an evangelist. Doesn't mean I have the gift of evangelism. But again, no excuse. I am to do the work of. I'm just not going to be supernatural, natural at it, like an evangelist. It's not going to be the first thing that comes to my mind. Or my way of it is probably going to be through my spiritual gifts. I do more talking about the gospel through teaching. Like I told you the story about the young girl, and I had her mark through the Roman road, and I was beating myself up later going, why did I waste her time doing that? And she takes that, didn't know it. On my couch, there was birthed an evangelist, spiritual birth. And she takes that home. She didn't intend this, but she walks in, and her brother-in-law looks at her and literally saw that face, that glow on her, and said, what changed? What happened? And she's told him, and as she told him, she pulls out her Bible and she walks him down the Roman road. And later I'm going, that's why. That's why I did that. So I put the equipping in her hands, because you know what? I know what I would have done, is later I would have gone, she said it was in here somewhere, right? But instead, I literally made her mark and then give the next reference, and like underline like it is in my Bible. And that's because I didn't know what I was doing when I'm sharing the gospel with somebody.
God knew.
And God knew. Yeah, it's awesome. It's a great tool. And I love putting resources in people's hands, but what a great thing that night, and then I've told some of the other stories where within a day or two, the woman that was sleeping with her husband called and was suicidal, and she got the call. And so she went over there to talk to this woman. This is God working in somebody. She went over there to talk to that person and led that person to Christ. It's an awesome story, and cost her husband a lot of problems, because now his wife and his brother who's visiting and his girlfriend have all gotten saved. His life was surrounded in a sense, and he kept saying he was, and he kept acting in his normal. Okay, so that's sin, salvation, and sanctification. What's the next segment? What's it taken?
Sovereignty.
Sovereignty. What chapters?
9 through 11.
Right. So it's sovereign. Sovereignty. Okay. Whose sovereignty?
Israel.
God's sovereignty. Right. And now it is talking about Israel in these chapters. I heard somebody say Israel. It is talking about Israel in these chapters. Why would God be talking about His sovereignty and talking about Israel at the same time? It's a great picture, right? Great group of people to talk about when you're talking about the sovereignty of God. Because we're talking about God's sovereignty, not Israel's, right? Okay. So, what does sovereignty mean? Reign. What does reign mean? Rule. Right. Means somebody, in this case, God, rules. He's in charge. Another way we'd say it is God is in control. Right? He makes decisions. He makes all of those decisions. Everything is in His power. Something that we really have to get in our heads. Right? When we've got fires on the West Coast and we've got 3 hurricanes headed towards landfall, whether in the United States or Mexico, on our continents, right? Do we feel like we're in very much control? No. Who is?
God is.
God is.
When we first moved here, just before we moved here, there was a tornado that had come through, and it went between the church that's next to my house and my house. And it touched down across the road and went up and wiped out all the trees. But we were talking to the little minister that was preaching there, and I said, well, what, because it happened on a Sunday. And we said, Woodrow, what in the world, what did you do? And he said, man, I was on my knees talking to the man that was driving that thing.
Absolutely. It seems like things are completely out of control. And they can certainly be out of our control, but they're not out of God's control. And we can look at the situations and know that we don't like them. We wish that they were not how they are. You know, there's tons of circumstances. I mean, tragedies, loss of loved ones, or loss of jobs, tragedies that come, or like tornadoes that wipe out homes, or the flooding in Texas. They're just sitting there, and the rain won't go away, and Harvey just stayed and stayed and stayed. Hurricane Harvey last month, and you're not in control. And you look around and you go, God, why would you do this? We don't know. can be preparing us, absolutely.
Trying to get our.
And we talked about that before the video. We talked about how we're not pointing to a point in Scripture and saying this fulfills a certain Scripture, except for in those general senses of Jesus said there's going to be birth pangs prior to the end times, prior to the end of the end. We're in end times. But prior to the last 3.5 years, or prior to those last 7 years, and prior to his return fully to the earth, there are going to be birth pangs even before that, even before the worst of the things that are happening in Revelation, that are spelled out in Revelation. There's going to be those things. So he's preparing us. He's getting our attention.
He wants us to trust him more.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
He wants us to trust him more. I love the idea of, I've told you, I love that song, Walk on Your Knees, because it's the picture of constantly through every moment of your day, you're in prayer. Doesn't mean you're literally on your knees and do nothing else. That's not what God's necessarily calling us to. He might call you to your knees. He might or call you to prayer and segments of time, but we're to be walking all the time, prayerfully minded all the time.
Yeah, think about it. I mean, how many times a day do we get called? I mean, do we think about him because of everything else?
That's what these circumstances can do, because they're very shaky, scary times. And so over and over and over, we're reminded to ask him. And sometimes it's very specific, like my friend's daughter who was leaving the Keys and coming up through Florida. I contacted my friend a couple of days ago before she left and just said, you know, I'm thinking about Micah. She is leaving, right? You know, because some choose to stay, and I would want to just go down there and pluck them, but she was going to leave anyway. But then definitely evacuation, so I'm glad. But then there's the travel prayers. They're everybody on the road, the accidents that can happen, but it brings out the good in people and it brings out the bad in people, you know. So I'm glad she's with a group. She's not
the light and people see it.
Yes.
Those people.
Yeah, the light can attract the people to the sense that you have shown forth God's light, but it also can be the beacon that brings the bugs. So, you know, just pray for her. And I was really glad to hear that she wasn't traveling alone, that there's a group that are traveling together, caravanning together to get out. So, yeah, it can really call you to prayer in a way you hadn't before. And then it just reminds you that life, there's no guarantee of the next moment. And so for yourself, in this sanctified time, make your account short with everybody, including God, meaning take care of things, deal with things. Realizing how life is precious, we're not to hold on to it in the wrong way, but God gives us life and he wants us to take it seriously. And then just make your accounts short with people and with God, and just kind of focuses in on what's important. Okay, so we've got the sovereignty of God, and then what's the next?
Service.
Service, and that goes through chapters what?
Oh, no, 14, 15,
Kinda half.
beginning of 15,
Okay, so this is service.
15, 13, something like that.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna just say like the middle of 15. And it's not that 16 is not included, but 16 more deals, the rest of 15 and all of 16 deals more with the doxology, benediction, personal notes, right? Just the kind of closing. The beginning, there was a portion at the beginning also that just kind of dealt with the greeting and the opening. So we've got, it's wonderful when they put it in something like alliteration. You've got sin, salvation, sanctification, sovereignty, and service. All right? Do you see a pattern? We've already talked about that with the first two, but you've got sin, salvation, sanctification, sovereignty, and service.
one leads to another.
Yeah, and it's not that they're exclusive of the other. It's just that when you're talking about an individual, let's talk about yourself, me. I had to come to my knowledge of sin, of myself, to come to salvation. And then once I'm saved, I'm going to be sanctified through the rest of my life. And that sanctification includes understanding I'm set apart, but understanding I'm becoming more and more like Jesus. And that's the time I'm in right now. But over the whole time, I'm going to become more and more aware of God's sovereignty in all of it. If it wasn't for God, I wouldn't be saved. If it wasn't for God, I wouldn't understand sin. If it wasn't for God, I wouldn't be in this process of sanctification. If it wasn't for God, I wouldn't have a measure by which I measured myself and became more and more like Jesus. And if it wasn't for God, there wouldn't be salvation. Where did it come from? Where did salvation come from? From God. And it came from, I'm sorry?
God's grace.
God's grace, absolutely. Provided through what action?
Death on the cross.
Death on the cross. God died. God came and God died. And God was raised. Right? And sovereign over all that circumstance. And that plan was in place, sovereignly in place, before the first sin was ever committed.
I was gonna say, did God know who was gonna be saved?
Yes.
So he just knows the whole plan. is
He's the
there.
whole plan, yes. And I don't know if the camera heard, but Sandy was saying, does God know who's going to be saved? Yes. God called them, therefore.
Already.
Yes, he knew. And he knew the part that my mind can't wrap around is when he created the world and when he brought man into existence, and the whole focus of everything in creation seems to be us. That boggles my mind, okay? But he also had in place, prior to the foundation of the world, it said that Jesus died prior to the foundation of the world. The plan was in place for taking care of our sin prior to man being created. So in the sovereignty of God, he knew he was creating them, and he knew we would sin. I know. I see the face. It's like it's hard to wrap my mind around that. Right. And it's not like he made mistakes. He didn't make mistakes. It's we are the ones. And understand, the first sin was, in what context? Adam and Eve. Where were they? In the garden. Okay. Just a place, no big deal, right?
Beautiful garden.
Beautiful garden.
Perfect.
Perfect. No sin. They weren't dealing with what we deal with. Totally provided for, right? All their food. They literally walked and plucked.
Yeah.
They didn't plant. They didn't look at that weed patch out there. I do that on purpose to show you sin. God is sovereign. This doesn't catch him by surprise. None of these hurricanes are catching him by surprise. None of these fires are catching him by surprise. He has a purpose and a plan in them. He has a purpose and a plan for us.
It's almost like he's pulling out the weeds.
Yes, you're right.
Making room for
He's,
the-
well, another would be
ones that he
sifting the
wanted.
wheat. Yeah, tossing so that the chaff is blown off, right? That'd be that idea. As we saw when we studied Revelation, and as we go into those end times, the true and the not true are definitely going to be, it's going to be shown, right? I'm sure I'm not the only one that has people that have been in your life that at one point were very much a part of your life, and either you've had to back away from them or something, but they've shown their true colors. Yes, Sandy?
Why would God have created Lucifer?
Sovereignty of God. He created him perfect. Yeah, he didn't create Satan or Lucifer
Right.
to become bad.
But
He
why
gave
did
him
he
a
allow
choice.
it?
Because of the sovereignty of God. There's not an easy answer. We wouldn't have written the story that way.
No.
Yeah, and therefore, if in the relationship of Adam and Eve, perfection, walking with God daily, in a perfect place, no sin in them, and everything provided for them.
How wonderful.
It's awesome. It's wonderful. Isn't it what we're waiting for?
Ignorance is bliss, so they didn't know any better.
They didn't know the difference
They
in...
did, but
They didn't know any better. That was their circumstance. Just like you as a child growing up, your life was the life that was normal, right?
Right.
And in some sense, you thought everybody else's life was like that. some very drastic situations, people are very aware theirs is not normal. But, you know, you didn't question a lot of things, right? You just, you know, whatever your parents said was true and whatever your teacher said was true. Oh, for those days. But then there's a point where you begin to you get out of that nest, or you get into the world. You see better or see worse. You know, hopefully you see worse and realize how good you had it, and go back to your parents and say that. And you might find things that you want to tweak and improve on. But Adam and Eve were in a perfect environment. Their Creator walked with them daily, talked to them face to face.
Or maybe that's why he let Lucifer happen, because you have to see who's gonna go the right way.
That's the ultimate outcome of it, absolutely, is, like I said, again, when we did Revelation, that all of it culminates in, all those events culminate in who is true and who is not. Jesus even separates the sheep from the goats in Matthew 25, remember that? Or 24, 25. And then that final battle, which we call the battle of Gog and Magog of chapter 20, right? Satan is bound for 1,000 years. There is no temptation on earth. It doesn't say there's no sin on earth. There's no temptation on earth for 1,000 years. People have the ability to live 1,000 years, because if you're born and you don't sin or aren't tempted, you can live a long time. Sin's what brings death, right? So that doesn't mean they don't sin. I'm just saying that they have the ability, even in that 1,000-year time. We're going to be in a different state. We're not going to be like we are now. We're going to have bodies, but we're not going to be in these bodies that are corruptible. But people are going to be born during that time that are like us, have that humanness about them. So at the very end, Satan is released for a short time, and what does he do? He does his best to do what? Deceive. That's his mantra. That's his one thing. Well, there's a lot, but it all centers around lying and deception, and that's his makeup, right? So he goes about, he's desperately trying to just take as many as he can with him. And he succeeds in deceiving a lot, doesn't he? Because it talks about the army that surrounds the city. But what happens to him? Fire comes out of heaven, incinerates them. And Satan is cast into the lake of fire. Forever. That's the forever for him. Right. And then you've got Great White Throne Judgment, and the rest of the events and all. But there is the ability, even after 1,000 years here on earth of no deception, that people are deceived. It's hard to imagine. But then after that, that's the last purging, the last and final. They had their chance, and then everybody from that time all the way back to Adam and Eve's time, anybody ever that died unsaved, faces the Great White Throne Judgment. And what is their fate? Where did they go? The cast into the lake of fire. Right. So, sovereignty. What is the outcome of sin, salvation, sanctification, and understanding the sovereignty of God? What are we going to do? We're going to serve. Right? And it's not that all of those things have to happen and then suddenly. They all kind of happen, in hopefully in a short period of time. So it's not that service is after sanctification. It's like while we're in our time of sanctification, we're in service.
It's a process.
It's part of the process, yes. It's part of our learning, it's part of our growing.
We put on God.
Yes, we put on God, because we're not doing it if we're doing it in our way, it's of only this much value, and it's not really. In human terms, it would be of value, but in godly terms, if we do things in our flesh and in our way apart from Him, it's iniquity. And those are the things, when you see that picture of going to the judgment seat, the bema seat, the good judgment seat, that we will be carrying, and I've shown you that picture of me like I'm way down with all this stuff that I've done. I'm so quite proud of that. And I'm carrying this cart behind me and everything else, and then I walk through that fire of refining fire, and I get to the end and I'm going to have what's valuable. What I did with the Holy Spirit in me. That's what's going to be of value. Everything else is going to be burned off, and When I approach the Bema seat, it's a positive thing. I approach as a child. I'm not approaching to see if, okay? But I will give an account for every word that proceeds out of my mouth, right? And that's part of that burning it all off. When I get to the Bema seat, I'm going to receive crowns, at least one, and it's all going to be because of Him. But I'm going to be rewarded. That's the Bema seat, is the reward. The judgment seat of Christ is a rewarding time. It's like the idea of the laurel wreath in the Olympics being placed on the head, or the gold medal going around your neck. It's that kind of judgment seat, where the Great White Throne judgment is not that kind of judgment. So that's part of, but we are told that works have been set apart from us before the foundation of the world. So in the sovereignty of God, He set apart works for the person He knew was going to get saved, because He was going to provide for it, and He was going to call me, all of that. So those works are set aside for me. That's part of what I get to do, not what I have to do, but what I get to do, right? It's an outpouring of my love and my gratitude, but also just overwhelmed by what could be instead of what is. That I didn't get, I got mercy. I didn't get what I did deserve, but I get to do, and I get the grace of God. And I guess the spiritual gifts are grace gifts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what they are. They're spiritual graces. Okay, so that's the service, and then you've got the personal notes at the end where we got some of our understanding of the historic context. Now, those aren't the only ways that we can look at this book. Did you have other segment divisions that really look? There was one we looked at one time that we're slaves to. There's in the segment divisions, and so these are all slaves to. What would the first one be? Did you? I don't know if y'all have got this one written down.
Slaves to sin.
Slaves to sin was the first one, and it goes through chapter 3. I'm gonna have to erase part of this.
Enslaved to God is the second one.
Yes.
Sin brings you closer to God, so.
Right. So this
it's
is.
better than mine.
These are the. I'm gonna put slaves above it. Slave to sin. That's the chapters 1 through 3. And I heard you say the next one, Sandy. What was
Slave
it?
to God.
Slave to God, and that goes through up to chapter 12, right? Goes through 11. This is slave to God,
And slave to serving God.
slave to service or serving God. Yeah, that's this last. And when we did our times last week, when we looked at our chapters last week, we started seeing this, that we're no longer slaves to sin, we're dead to sin, we have peace with God, we're now slaves of righteousness. Sandy mentioned that one earlier. Slaves of righteousness, slaves to God, so we submit to the righteousness of God. In contrast, Israel did not subject themselves, but we are to submit ourselves or subject ourselves to the righteousness of God. That's all part of that idea of being a slave of God, slave to God. Bondservant is another way of putting it, as we talked about earlier. And then the last is, as a result of that, we're slave to serving God, right? Okay. Other segment divisions. Anybody have any others they wanted to point out?
Doctrinal and practical. Doctrinal and
Very
practical.
good. Okay, what are those divisions? Doctrinal and practical.
For 11 for doctrinal and 12 through 16 practical.
Okay, so this is doctrinal,
Somebody said that.
and that's practical.
Start out with the prologue and the epilogue at the end.
Right. Yeah, kind of leaving those out sort of, although those are somewhat practical too. But doctrinal versus practical. That's a great way of looking at Romans. And it's also a great way of looking at our relationship with God, right? There's a doctrinal side to it. You can't just look at the practical and the how-tos. It's like, how did you get there? And what definitional ways does that, what things does that mean to you? And how does it change your thinking? And that's part of the doctrine, right?
I have an interesting little analogy that I read somewhere that You can be as straight as a gun barrel theologically and just as empty spiritually.
Ah, yeah. Yeah. Because we all, I had a pastor, the pastor of the church that I got saved in. And I love the fact that he was very, I don't mean this to sound negative at all. He was very basic. He was very foundational, like we talked about with Paul. Love that because I needed all of that. You know, it was like every week I was like this, you know, just absorb. And at the same time, God sovereignly had me in Precept studies, which are just like, they were great. And I was learning. So I'm learning from him and I'm learning. And he made the point on one of his sermons about how we go through stages, just like you go through stages of physical life, you know, baby to toddler, preschooler, childhood, teenage years, early adulthood to dying, you know, elderly and dying, okay? Well, we have a spiritual picture of that, and you go through those spiritual stages a lot, sometimes faster, obviously, than living through them. And he said there's that one point, you know, you've gone through your infancy stage and you've gained a little bit of information and all, but you go through those teen years, the adolescence of your spiritual life. And what's the first thing that most teenagers the H word they use that points to other people? They're the first to point out hypocrisy, right? Everybody's a hypocrite, right? And there's that spiritual pride, you know, of they're reinventing in a sense, like they're fixing us because we're so bad and they figured it out and all of that. That's part of being an adolescent, right? You start thinking for yourself, which is not the worst thing, but in so doing, you usually have a tendency to be pointing your finger at others a lot. What's that? Judgmental, yeah, and they may not be wrong about the whole hypocrisy thing. They may not be wrong about the things they see, but it's usually wrong in how they do it. And so he was just saying, you know, you will, as a spiritual child of God, possibly go through some of those stages as well. And I mean, seriously, I was sitting there going, you know, like it was convicting because I'm hearing some of the phrases and thinking, I've had those thoughts. You know, you're wondering, I wondered, I got very frustrated as a brand new Christian, thinking back to the time I was raised and growing up in church and saying, why didn't anybody tell me this? Why didn't anybody tell me the gospel? And later I had to go, maybe they did and I just missed it, weren't listening, or God hadn't revealed the truth to me, or my heart was, you know, veiled or whatever. And that's so I've catch myself going, I never heard, and then I stop and go, I don't know if I did or not. I don't know if it was said in my presence, but
Is regret a sin? Because you regret not finding him sooner?
well, I don't know that it's a sin. I think it's kind of an okay enough, unless you take it too far, if you dwell on that. But if you have that moment of just saying, because it potentially would have kept you from some choices and ideas, you know, and you could have known more sooner. But as soon as you do that and you evaluate that, just stop and go, but I am where I am now. And if you go again, Galatians chapter 1, it talks about Paul's salvation and saying, in the timing of God. Let's look at that real fast, because he says it so well. I just read it recently. Pretty sure I'm right that it's in Galatians 1. Somebody knows it's somewhere else. Galatians comes before Ephesians.
Chapter 1?
Yes. And it's starting in verse, I was going to say starting in verse 10, but really we could go down
I have 10
to,
highlighted for some reason.
I'm sorry?
I have 10 highlighted.
10 highlighted, for am I now seeking the favor of men or of God, or am I striving to please men? If I were still trying to please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. For I would have you know, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man. For I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. This is an incredible part of Paul's story. For you've heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it, and I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. But when, this is so key, but when he, who had set me apart, even from my mother's womb, called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach him among the Gentiles. I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood, nor did I go up to Jerusalem. And then he goes on. Okay, so it's the when of verse 15 that is so significant, because he said, when he, God, who had already set him apart, even from his mother's womb, even before he was born, okay? He set him apart. That's the idea of sanctification, of holiness, right? Set him apart, and then it says, when he called me through his grace, was pleased to reveal his Son in me. There is a when. There is a when there. In God's sovereign timing, God's sovereignty period, he called Paul, but he had set him apart long before then. He'd set him apart. It says from his mother's womb. We could even say prior to his mother's womb. But he set him apart even from his mother's womb. When, therefore, there's a point, he called me through his grace and was pleased to reveal his Son in me. Paul, who had all the training in the world. Paul, who had some of the best teaching there was in Judaism, the truth. That's why, in a sense, it's like Paul had all of that, and he was extremely zealous of it. He wasn't just a mean guy that went after and tried to kill people. Paul really believed, sincerely was deceived and believed, that what he was doing was for God. He wasn't a Roman that had his God over here, little g God, and or the I was going to say Pharaoh, but it's Caesar that they claim to be a god. This was Paul who thought he believed in the one true God.
Right.
But what he rejected was what had he rejected? What teaching had he rejected? What events had he? Jesus. That's the defining thing. He had believed everything he thought about Judaism so zealously, he was willing to go after what he thought was false teaching. If you were a strong Jew with that level of training, and you heard what people were saying about Jesus, and you did not believe he was the Messiah, you would hopefully have done what Paul did. Right? I know that sounds very strange for me to say, hopefully you would have done that. I'm saying he was that convicted, convinced, absolutely believed it. He acted on it. There's no doubt of what Paul believed, right? But on the road, on the literal road, when God basically knocked him off his horse and blinded him, it was like just a light switch, just a simple transition, except for it took years of training even by Jesus personally. That's what's so incredible about his story. He didn't hear this from anybody first. He heard it from Jesus himself. Was trained by Jesus. So when you read the book of Romans, you're getting a man trained one-on-one by Jesus.
Isn't that awesome?
It's incredible.
Jamie.
Talk about the sovereignty of God. Okay, so that's where there are people, and I can think of some. I mean, I'll even take my story, not that I'm that incredible. I'm just saying the training I did get through church, through morals and ethics and standards of behavior and some form of right and wrong, was a great foundation that kept me from a lot of bad and a lot of bad choices. Not all bad choices, but a lot of bad choices. And whatever God had in me that just made me who I was. Then when I did get saved, I got to draw on all of that. But God still had some work to do to root out some bad teaching and bad thinking on my part, and to train me in truth and equip me to do that, and then give me training through Precept, etc., and then doing this for 20-something years. So I'm not saying my story is Paul's, but it's true maybe of some of you. Maybe you grew up in the church too, and there was just a point when God saved you. Maybe you were saved as a child in the church. Awesome. Maybe you were saved apart from church, but that's a lot of the story. Maybe it was one of those wonderful VBSs, and the truth is revealed in a very simple way because the gospel is so simple, even children grasp it, sometimes better than us. And maybe you went down and walked the aisle, and maybe you got saved. Maybe that's your story. And you look back and thought, it wasn't perfect. you were kept from a lot of nasty sin. A lot of regrets, even, Sandy, as you're talking about. You're kept from, I can look back on my pre-salvation life and still thank God that I had the parents I had, the place I had, and the churches I had that kept me from a lot of crud. I still had some. So I don't have that much regret, but I do have the regret I do wish it was sooner. And then I go back to this idea, when it was God's purposeful timing and for me, He saved me. So I don't regret that He did it when He did it, in that sense. And I have my story. I have the burden and emphasis I have for being concerned about people that were like me. You know, raised in the church, and that's enough for them.
Thinking they were okay.
Thinking they're okay. That was my term. I was okay. God, I didn't have a problem with God. I mean, as far as I didn't hate Him, never shook my fist at Him, never doubted His existence. But I wasn't saved. So I've got grave concerns about people who were like me, in that they have everything the church can do for them, but it's not salvation. And they're very deceived. So does that answer your question, Sandy? There are other segment divisions. This gets us a really good, we've thought about through some of the ideas of the book of Romans. Next week, we'll start into some basic doctrines. Remember, we're in the doctrinal section, since that's 1 through 11, and we'll be focusing in on chapters 6 through 8, which is sanctification. Be prepared that this section could step on toes, but it'll also equip you for the work of service. Services later, but it's when you, as a holy person, there's the idea of cleanness. Right? When Christ calls somebody into salvation and you're covered in His blood and you're saved, you are cleansed from all sin. So the sanctification is a part of staying clean. Right? How to, and what does that look like? What does being set apart look like? And it's not the idea of going off somewhere into like a monastery or something, or commune, as we might say. I mean, I'm up on this hill, y'all could all come and live here, and we could all, cut the world out. That's not the idea of sanctification. Being set apart means being set apart unto service, ultimately. So we got to impact the world, right? We can't just be that, as I think I said it last week, but our pastor once said, the old song, remember this little light of mine, I'm going to let shine, hide it under a bushel, no. It's scripture, don't hide your light under a bushel, right? Well, he said a lot of times we have a tendency to do that. You would put a glass or globe over a flickering candle. Think of a candle to protect it from the wind, so it would continue burning. But the hope would be, it'd be something more like those lamps that are up there that have a globe on them that you could carry them around. And that light would shine forth, and it would shine forth for you, and it would shine forth so people can be drawn to you. That's the idea of your light. But he said we have a tendency to cover it up, don't let anybody actually even see we have it, and then we come into church, and now I'm going to show my light. This is a safe place. And everybody's got their candles out, right? So we're shining light in a shining place. If we lit a candle right now, it wouldn't shed much light. We'd see it, and that would be it. Right? But where does a light shine forth the brightest? In darkness. So we take that outside of the building, is the idea, and into the world. And let people, what it does is it attracts attention, good and bad. People are going to know you have that light. And that's going to draw fire. It's going to draw good. So that's the idea. Don't come to church and show everybody your light, and you've got one too, and I've got one, and aren't we great? And come to church. Don't get me wrong, do that. But leave the building with it, and let the world see it, and draw forth those that will, and realize it's not up to you, it's up to God. Mm-hmm. The same God that called Paul and called you is calling people. And Jesus even said, I know my sheep because they respond to my voice. As a shepherd, he would speak, and his sheep. If you've seen that picture, there was a video on Facebook somewhere, like in Scotland or somewhere, where there was like a stone wall and there were all these visitors, and the shepherd, the sheep in the field, and a shepherd told them like what to say. He did it, he told them what to say. They kept calling the sheep and kept calling the sheep, and the sheep weren't paying them up. They might look, what's that? God, what's that irritating gnat? What's that nasty noise? And they said the same thing. All of them said the same thing. And the shepherd stood there, said it, and they all came. Because he knew his voice. That's the picture of Jesus. He said, I know those that are mine because they respond to my voice. Sheep responding to a shepherd. That's what Jesus was saying, right? I'm not that shepherd, but if I'm speaking forth Jesus' words and people respond, I will know it. Jesus will know it ultimately. That's the main thing. But they will recognize the words are from the shepherd. They'll recognize, I'm not the shepherd. I'm not Jesus. I'm just saying, they will be known. That's why we're also told that we will be known by our fruit, right? We're not known because we say something about ourselves. We're known by how we live our lives. Known meaning in the sense of, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, many will come to me and say, Lord, Lord, and I will say, depart from me, I never knew you. If you want to know the word know, that's where it's the most important. Not who I know, but who knows me. Remember, Jesus says, I know my sheep. And we recognize and respond as his sheep. Awesome pictures. Next week, starting on basic doctrines, the depravity of man being the first one. Remember, the beginning of doctrine is going to be bad news. So hang in there. So it's depravity of man, and then we'll get into the other doctrines and see where this, not just see where this takes us. We know we're going to be focusing on 7 to 8. We'll break, we'll pray, we'll break, we'll eat our food and watch the video from Kay. I've got a couple of things we need to set up. And is anything else anybody want to say before we end?
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank God.
Well,
It's good
thank God
stuff,
too,
isn't
but
it?
thank you too.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's great stuff. Romans is,
Yeah.
was Kay called Romans? Constitution of our faith.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is very foundational, great stuff. And it's going to be convicting. Be prepared for that. Remember, we come into this excited because we're glad to get back, but remember, we're going to come under attack. We're in just our lives. It can be things like car trouble. That might keep us from being here, And I'm not saying this in a judgment like, Jackie's hip and back pain. I'm not saying it in a judgment at all. I'm saying reality. These things happen. And just be prepared, because I always have to remind myself, it's all good. I'm so excited and everything else, but life is going to come at you. And it's going to try to distract you and all. So just be mindful of that. Be prayerful as you start your study, but be praying overall. I've really gotten committed again to even journaling, and I've been every day praying for you, praying for this group, and praying for our study as a group. So pray for each other. Try to get the prayer stuff back. Try to remember some of these in prayer. Gracious and